Hello, my name is Jason Lee. Today I'm going to give a talk about the final project of Big Data course. The title of my talk is Life of New Immigrants in the United States. Now, we're in the era of new immigrants. Then what are they? So we know about the traditional immigrants. Traditionally, people came from West Europe, a little bit from Latin America. They're considered traditional immigrants. But what are the new immigrants we're talking about? Generally, just those areas who are traditionally not the supplier of the settlers to the United States, of course, since the Civil War. So these areas, generally places like South Europe, Asia, and other places in the world. Then few questions arises. Since we're talking about them, then where are they actually from? And more importantly, how are their lives in the United States? These are the questions we're trying to answer here. And to do that, we need some data. Now, the data source we get is the 5% public use microdata sample files, also called PUMS. These are taken directly from the raw data of US Census. This is for year 2000. It's like 10 years old, but they're still valid and good data. So this data consists of 52 files. Each file represents a state, and the total volume of this data is 5.8 gigabytes unzipped. So this actually is a large amount. So how do we deal with this data? What's the method? So this volume is big. Usually it's beyond the capacity of a single tool or single computer. If you still don't think 5.8 is big, think about that. It's only 5% of the raw data, and this only 1 year. Think about the full data in 10 years. That could be terabytes. It's way beyond one single machine. So that's why we need big data strategy. But there are a lot of different strategies. Now we're considering for this data, they are text formatted and they're delimited by the location. What does that mean? Let's take a look at this data. So each line here represents a single entry, possibly one person or one household. So this is just like a data stream. Makes no sense to human mind. So that makes relational database a little bit hard to use. So we're not choosing Peak or Hive here. So for this application, we choose to write our own dedicated MapReduce application. The environment we're using here is first hardware. We're using basically adding computing clusters with Hadoop support. The software we're using is Cloudera CDH 5.7, and we are using Python as the programming language. Also, it requires the support of the package called Pydo. Okay, this is how we're going to do our programs, and let's take a look at what we can get out of this data and programs. First question we ask: new immigrants, where are they from? This is a world map. Traditionally, immigrants came from West Europe and Latin America, this back in the days. But now, as we mentioned, we're in a new era. This is the data we get for the new immigrants. This immigration map is for the year 2000, which we got from the PUMS data we mentioned before. We can see that Latin America now is the biggest source of immigrants. So almost half of the immigrants are from Latin America. This makes perfect sense because considering Spanish is practically the second official language of this country. The second largest source is Asia. So almost 1/4 of the immigrants from Asia, including myself. And Europe shrink to the third source of immigrants, which is like 1/5 of the immigrants are from Europe. There are also smaller sources like North America, mostly we're talking about Canada, and also a little bit people from Africa, and only like 1%, less than 1% of immigrants are from Oceania. So that's interesting. We know now we know where they came from. Now let's take a look at what their lives are like. So this is a big question and it's difficult to answer. There's no general answer like good or bad. So, but the indicators we can look into. One indicator is educational attainment. Another one is employment. Now, let's take a look at those things and determine how do they tell us the life of the new immigrants. First, the educational attainment. This is the calculated data from year 2000. The blue bars here, excuse me, the blue bars here are the data of immigrants, and as a comparison, the orange bars are US average. So we take a look at the educational background for elementary or less, middle school, high school, college equivalent, and graduate school. So we can see that there are three groups in this chart. First group is middle school or less. The percentage of immigrants who hold a middle school degree or less is higher than US average. But the second group, those who have high school to college degrees, immigrants has less people who hold high school degree or college degree than US average. So these two groups actually tells us the same story, that basically most of the immigrants have less educational background than US average. This makes sense considering United States is still the top one power in the world. People from other places like Latin America, like Asia, generally, they do not have that advanced education system. So yeah, it makes sense that most people are less educated than US average. However, the interesting part comes from the third group. Even though most of the people have less educational background, we can see that the immigrants who holds graduate degrees is significantly more than US average. This is an interesting story. So even though immigrants come from places usually have less advanced education system than United States, there are still small group of people who who are highly educated, have exceptional skills, and they come to United States to pursue a better life. So that's interesting story that we have two different groups of immigrants. As a matter of fact, United States love this small group of exceptional people because they also make contribution to the country. So the government also loves to have them stay here. That's an interesting part. Now, we know about their educational background. Let's take a look at next one, employment, or specifically unemployment. This is the data we calculate for the unemployment rate for immigrants, labeled as blue bars, and United States overall. There are still two groups. First group is middle school degree or less. For immigrants, actually have less unemployment rate if they hold a middle school degree or less. That's because even though they come from places that have less advanced education system than the United States, doesn't mean they are bad people. They're still hardworking, dedicated people, and they can learn things and they work really hard. And they do not demand a lot of salary. As a matter of fact, employers love this kind of employees. However, if you hold a high school degree or higher, you are less likely to be employed as immigrants. This is because, as we know, the higher degrees you get, the more salaries you demand. And on top of that, immigrants also demands other supports like tuition fee if I'm graduate students, or visa, green card. That takes a lot of money, and not every employer is willing to pay this kind of money. So this actually tells us a truth that employers usually prefer immigrants as good laborers, but not everyone is willing to pay for their exceptional skills. This can be seen more clearly in their salary. So we can see that this is the salary pulled from the data, and also the blue are for the immigrants, and the orange are for the United States overall. We can see clearly immigrants make much less money, especially for those who have graduate degrees. We make like 2/3 of the US average. This is the sad truth. As a matter of fact, even though employers are willing to pay for those people, this still demands a lot of support from tuition, from a visa, from green card. That's what we mentioned before. And this money just came right out of the salary. So if people do the same amount of work, the immigrants will get paid less than US average. This is sad truth. The only exception is that for the least, for people with least educational background, they make slightly more than US overall. This is also what I mentioned before. Yes, most employers prefer immigrants as good laborers. So let's summarize the story. We first take a look at these new immigrants. Where are they from? So instead of Europe, we have new source immigrants like Latin America and Asia. And we take a look at their background. So most of them come from less developed background, but there's also a small group of highly educated people with exceptional skills who come to the United States for a better life. But sad truth is that most employers prefer immigrants as good laborers, but not many are willing to pay for their exceptional skills. And last, the new immigrants are generally living at a much lower life standard. We make less money, and we are less likely to be hired. So this is the truth the new immigrants are facing in this new era. And thank you for listening.